One step past.
Way past strange. The voice of G.I. Joe. Before our story, a little background. This is such a unique story of allegedly true paranormal activity that I have to tell you about its background. I normally won't cover anything that can't be verified by more than one source. If you have more than one source, you can be pretty sure the story is authentic. It's like having multiple witnesses. I don't have that this time, but I still think this story is on the level. Why do I think so? It's because I trust the one source I do have, Margaret Ronan. Margaret was an editor and regular contributor to Scholastic's publications. She had quite a lengthy career as an author of fiction and nonfiction. Although she wrote about various topics, a particular favorite with her was anything to do with the supernatural. Margaret authored many books on what she claimed was true cases of the paranormal. Since she had a good reputation and regular work as an author, I believe her story of G.I. Joe actually happened. I came across this strange adventure in an issue of Dynamite magazine from 1981. It was a children's magazine published by Scholastic. It had a regular feature called True Tales of Terror. I have read this feature in other issues of the magazine, and I do know those accounts were based on actual recorded paranormal phenomena. They were all cases that were quite obscure, then and now. And this case of G.I. Joe is probably the most obscure of the obscure. Now on to the story. It was a Friday in the middle 1970s. Carl was 14 years old and worked a paper route. After almost a year of this job, he had saved up enough money for a cassette recorder. This was a pretty big thrill back then. You could record on it, play cassettes with it. Good times. Carl took the cassette recorder to his friend Matt to show off. He wanted to record some of Matt's many impressions. Matt did a lot of big celebrities. Howard Cosell, Humphrey Bogart, James Dean, Marlon Brando, and John Wayne. They didn't get a chance to play back the tape because Matt's mother sent him on an errand. So Carl went back home to do his homework. It wasn't until early that evening when Carl finally got a chance to play back the tape. He rewound it, hit the play button, then heard something he didn't expect. It wasn't Matt's voice, that's for sure. The tape started out with a weird whistling sound. Then it went into a faint, tinny voice. The voice was certainly that of an adult man. "Hi, Carl. I'm G.I. Joe. You're in trouble, Carl, but maybe I can help you. You'll be hearing from me." After that, there was nothing on the tape. Where were Matt's impressions? Who was the guy on the tape, and how did he know Carl's name? It was enough to send chills down his spine, but nothing compared to what happened next. Maybe I didn't hear what I thought I heard, Carl thought to himself. He rewound the tape and played it again. Matt still wasn't on the tape. It was G.I. Joe again, but with a different message. "Now listen and listen well. You and your friend Matt like to hang out in the old shed down the hill. I know all about the tunnel you're trying to dig there. Well, that place is out of bounds from now on. Stay away from it. That's an order." After that, there was a click and silence. This was a real freakout. However, after a little while, it made Carl more mad than anything. For one, anything he recorded on the cassette recorder was going to be G.I. Joe. For another, where did G.I. Joe get off telling Carl what he can or can't do? That shed had been deserted for years. Carl and Matt took it as their own personal property. At one time, the shed was part of an army storage depot, but the army had packed up and moved on. Everything around it was mostly in shambles. The shed, however, made a great hangout. If anything, G.I. Joe made Carl more curious as to what was in the shed. The next day was Saturday. Carl called up Matt, told him something weird was going on, and to meet him at the shed. Carl got there first, and when he did, he took the cassette recorder out of his knapsack. "Let's see what the creep has to say now," Carl said loudly, and pressed the button. "Insubordination," said G.I. Joe. "If you'd been in my platoon, you'd obey orders. But you're just a kid." "Okay, I tried. Go ahead and dig your tunnel. You could take a one-way trip to the moon by digging just 6 inches deeper. Over and out." Nervous as a cat, Carl got up and went to the 4-foot square hole he and Matt had dug in the shed's dirt floor. Something was stuck in the dirt that hadn't been there before. Carl jumped down in the hole and picked it up. By then, Matt had arrived and was looking down at Carl in the hole. The boys had seen enough toy commercials on TV to know what this was. It was a G.I. Joe doll, bearded, and wearing battle fatigues. This was really weird. The doll didn't belong to either Carl or Matt. As far as they knew, no one else came to this place. Where did it come from? Carl dropped the doll, but he still had to dig. He had Matt come down in the hole and help him. This time, however, they would just use their hands instead of shovels. G.I. Joe said just 6 inches. Soon they came to metal, and on the metal were the words U.S. Army. It was a live shell. The boys jumped out of the hole and contacted the authorities. An hour later, the bomb squad came and took away the shell. Carl then explained to Matt about G.I. Joe's warnings. He wished he could have said thanks, but who was the man who identified himself as G.I. Joe? The G.I. Joe who spoke to Carl on the tape recorder could have been anyone, but since he was connected to the Army depot, it's likely he was a soldier who was stationed there. Where did this happen? According to Margaret Ronan's article, Carl grew up to become a teacher and, when this was published in 1981, was located in Los Angeles. Most Army storage depots weren't placed right in the middle of major cities, but usually located in smaller communities outside of those big places. It's reasonable to assume this story happened somewhere in or very near California. A lot of details to this story were purposely left vague by the author to protect the people involved. I can respect that. However, enough time has passed that maybe someone is willing to disclose more information. I would like to know more specifics about this adventure with G.I. Joe. If anyone knows anything about this that they'd like to share, I would be willing to make an update video. As it stands, this is a fun story, a positive experience, and way past strange. Hold up, hold up, hold up. The video's not over yet. Where did the name G.I. Joe come from? GI itself was a term that started in World War I, but it did not refer to American soldiers. Back then, U.S. soldiers were called doughboys. The term GI originally stood for galvanized iron. GI was stamped on the U.S. Army's trash cans and buckets at that time. The trash cans were referred to as GI cans. The term GI can also referred to the German artillery shells. The shells could be quite big, and the shell casings, when empty, looked like trash cans. During that same war, GI started being interpreted as government issue or general issue. This referred to the basic items soldiers and airmen received from their branch of service. Today, GI is best known for meaning government issue. It started being applied directly to soldiers when the draft started in 1940, and it entirely replaced the term doughboy. The nickname of G.I. Joe originated in 1942 during World War II. Cartoonist Dave Breger, who had been drafted, came up with a comic strip he called G.I. Joe for a weekly military magazine called Gank. G.I. Joe became the generic term for U.S. soldier, and it took off from there. G.I. Joe, doll or action figure? The original 12-inch toy line of G.I. Joe was released in 1964. It was a doll, no question about it, but no self-respecting boy would be caught playing with a doll. Hasbro never called G.I. Joe a doll, marketing it as an action figure. More or less, action figures were dolls for boys. It wasn't until 1982 when G.I. Joe was relaunched as a line of much smaller figures measuring 3 3/4 inches in height. From here on, you couldn't call G.I. Joe a doll anymore because they weren't very doll-like. At this point, they could be called action figures and truly be different from dolls. The 1980s decade, in particular, really established action figures as we know them today. Cassette recorders. The technology of tape recording had been around for quite a while before it was released commercially on a wide scale. The Philips Company invented the compact audio cassette and the player recorder to go with it in 1963. It took until the following year before it hit the market. Philips' invention was originally made for office use in dictation machines. Secretaries, even executives themselves, used these devices. It wasn't the best back then, but it got the job done. Over the years, when Philips and other companies improved upon the invention, they noticed that the sound quality became quite good. You could actually put music on the tapes and it would sound just as good, if not better, than vinyl. It replaced 8-track tapes and the older reel-to-reel tape machines as the dominant tape technology by the middle 1970s. It was the middle 1970s when the portable cassette recorder, like Carl had, really hit its stride. This was cool stuff. As the years rolled by, much better cassette players would be developed. Stereos became quite big and elaborate. By the middle to late 1970s for sure, cassette players became the hot thing to have for car radios, replacing the big, clunky 8-track players. It would take a while for 8-tracks to completely die out, but die out they did. Cassettes even outlasted vinyl records, but vinyl refuses to die and has enjoyed revivals in popularity from time to time. The technology of cassettes and cassette recorders kept getting better throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Sadly for cassettes, CDs debuted in the late 1980s and started to steal their thunder. Cassettes lasted for quite a while because early CDs didn't sound quite as good as CDs made later in the 1990s and 2000s. However, by the late 1990s, the cassette format had lost its star status to CDs. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this trip into the way past strange.